Nature can turn deadly in a heartbeat, even in places people think are safe. From a grizzly bear rampaging through an RV park in Montana to a starving polar bear charging into a remote Alaskan village, in this video, we'll dive into 6 chilling tales of bear attacks on humans. Discover how ordinary moments can spiral into life-or-death struggles when wild animals are driven by hunger, instinct, or desperation. On the evening of September 12, 2025, the Montana wilderness held a quiet that seemed unusually deep for late summer. The sun dipped low, painting the treetops with gold, while a crisp wind hinted at the approach of autumn. At a local RV park, families moved about, settling into the cooling twilight. Children chased each other near the riverbank, their laughter echoing through the clearing, and the smell of wood smoke mingled with the earthy scent of the surrounding forest. Among the visitors was the Thompson family, who had arrived that morning from Missoula. Their 2 children, Emily and Jacob, darted ahead of their parents to skip stones along the river. Nearby, a group of local kids threw pebbles into the water, their shouts blending with the gurgling flow, oblivious to the larger, unseen presence watching from the edge of the dense tree line. From the shadowed forest, a massive grizzly stirred, its nose twitching as it picked up the scent of food and human activity. Already restless from the approach of fall and the thinning availability of natural prey, the animal moved cautiously at first, a hulking silhouette slipping between the trees. The crunch of leaves under its weight was barely perceptible, but to the children it seemed like a sudden, inexplicable whisper in the underbrush. Emily bent to retrieve another rock, unaware that a darker movement had entered her peripheral vision. Jacob laughed, running ahead toward the water, waving his arms to catch attention. In that instant, the grizzly, reacting to the unfamiliar sound of high-pitched voices and the scent of leftover snacks, broke cover. Its massive frame lunged forward, claws raking at the soft earth with explosive energy that shook the ground, and the children froze, eyes widening as instinct overtook innocence. The first screams pierced the evening, high and raw, as the bear's focus shifted, sensing the small, vulnerable shapes in its path. Parents, startled by the sudden commotion, sprinted toward the riverbank, hearts hammering, grabbing at children in frantic attempts to pull them out of harm's way. Rocks scattered underfoot as the bear swiped again, striking the ground near Emily, who stumbled back into her mother's arms. The air was thick with the acrid stench of fear and crushed foliage, mingling with the fading warmth of campfires and charred wood from overturned grills. Nearby, a couple who had just returned from unloading their RV watched helplessly as the bear charged into the center of the campground, its immense shoulder muscles rippling beneath thick brown fur. Coolers exploded under its weight, sending ice and food scattering like dangerous projectiles. An RV window shattered as a heavy paw struck the glass with bone-crushing force, sending shards flying in all directions. The bear's attention shifted momentarily to a toppled grill, which in the chaos caught flame from stray coals and sent a burst of sparks into the dusk sky. Families scrambled to gather children, clutching bags, pets, and whatever makeshift shields they could find, retreating toward vehicles and distant trails. The air was filled with a symphony of chaos, screams, shouts, the roar of the bear, and the crackle of burning wood, a terrifying harmony that seemed to stretch endlessly in the minds of those trapped in the moment. Amid the turmoil, a ranger stationed near the entrance, Thomas Hargrove, a veteran of the Montana Wildlife Service with 20 years of experience, had been monitoring the RV park for signs of wildlife intrusion. He moved swiftly, adrenaline sharpening his senses as he retrieved a flare gun from his belt holster. Each flare arced high into the fading light, illuminating the clearing in a brief, harsh glow, startling the bear and forcing it to hesitate. Sniffing the air, uncertain and agitated, the animal lingered near the flaming grill, its roar blended with the heavy thud of its own breathing. Parents used the brief pause to drag children to the safety of larger RVs, forming a protective wall of bodies as the ranger fired another round into the sky. The grizzly, growling low and guttural, finally retreated, moving back toward the dense forest as if reluctantly conceding the chaos it had created. Its massive form slipped into the shadows, disappearing almost as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Overturned coolers, scattered groceries, shattered glass, smoldering ash, and frightened families clinging to one another in stunned silence. Several people suffered injuries, scratches, bruises, and minor cuts from the shattered glass and the panicked stampede, but none were life-threatening, though the emotional toll was immediate and intense, with faces pale and hearts racing long after the bear vanished from sight. In the aftermath, the RV park lay in ruin, its tranquility shattered in mere minutes. the ground littered with debris and charred remnants of what had once been a peaceful campground. Parents comforted their children, whispering reassurances into trembling ears, while others moved carefully among the wreckage, searching for personal belongings and assessing the damage. Ranger Hargrove, speaking to each family in turn, documented injuries and damage, noting the bear's likely motivation: hunger, territorial stress, and the proximity of human activity, and advising precautionary measures for the coming nights, emphasizing the importance of securing food and maintaining awareness of the surrounding forest. Though no lives had been lost, the fear and chaos etched themselves into memory, a vivid warning of the fragility of human control in the face of wild predators. The children, once laughing and carefree near the riverbank, now clung to their parents, eyes wide with lingering terror, while the adults, though grateful for survival, carried an acute awareness that one wrong step, one moment of inattention, could have turned the night into a nightmare beyond imagination. In the hours that followed, as darkness fully enveloped the Montana wilderness and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures resumed, the RV park remained alive with cautious whispers, the flicker of emergency lights, and the unshakable realization that the untamed forest had momentarily reclaimed its power, reminding all who had witnessed it that nature, in all its raw force, waits patiently for even the smallest lapse to unleash chaos. The waters off Kodiak Island were calm but cold on the gray morning of September 7th, 2023, the air thick with the briny scent of the sea and the faint tang of salmon freshly caught earlier. Jack Thompson, 42, a seasoned commercial fisherman with sun-leathered skin and calloused hands, had anchored his small aluminum boat in a sheltered cove alongside his longtime friend Brian Miller, 39, a wiry, quick-moving man who had spent most of his life along the Alaskan coast. They had spent hours hauling nets and gaffing fish, and now, as the tide lulled gently against the hull, they began the tedious work of cleaning their catch. Mist hung low over the shoreline, and the dense spruce and alder forest rose steeply from the rocky coast, casting shadows that rippled with the movement of the wind and the water. Neither man noticed at first the enormous shape emerging from the tree line. A massive Kodiak bear, its fur a dark brown streaked with lighter gold, padded silently along the rocky shore, sniffing the air, drawn by the unmistakable odor of freshly caught salmon. Its eyes glinted with a mix of curiosity and hunger, and its massive shoulders rippled with power as it moved closer, the rocks crunching beneath its paws. Jack was the first to notice a shadow shifting unnaturally among the trees, and then the full breadth of the bear revealed itself as it plunged into the shallows, water spraying around its enormous frame as it propelled itself toward the small aluminum boat. Panic ignited instantly, coursing through their veins with frightening speed. Jack's hand shot toward the motor, yanking at it, while Brian, caught mid-motion with a freshly gutted salmon in hand, grabbed the nearest oar as if it could serve as a shield. The bear reached the boat in moments that felt stretched into hours, rearing up on its hind legs, towering above the men with teeth bared and claws extended. It slammed against the hull with a weight that made the aluminum groan and flex, rocking the vessel violently and sending a spray of brine over their faces. Jack stumbled backward, barely holding onto the throttle, while Brian tried desperately to brace himself, one hand gripping the oar, the other scraping at the slippery deck for purchase. The first strike came without warning. The bear's claws slashed at the deck, gouging metal and leaving deep scratches. Brian, caught off balance, fell sideways, pain erupting in his leg as the claws raked across his shin, tearing through layers of thick pants and flesh. Blood pooled rapidly across the aluminum, dark against the gray metal. Jack lunged, gripping his friend under the armpits and hauling him back onto the deck, their combined weight barely stabilizing the swaying boat. The bear growled low and guttural, a vibration that reverberated through the water and into their bones, before rearing again and pounding the side of the boat with enough force to dent the hull and jolt both men to the edge of the railing. Time stretched, each second charged with the threat of injury or worse, the chaos around them magnified by the spray of water, flailing limbs, and the relentless advance of the massive predator. Fish and cleaning tools flew in every direction, tumbling into the water or clattering against the deck as the bear pressed its advantage, sniffing and pawing at the boat in a frenzy of hunger and instinct. Jack's knuckles whitened around the motor's throttle as he fought to start it, knowing that the only chance of survival lay in leaving the cove and outrunning the bear through the choppy waters. Brian gritted his teeth, blood streaming from his leg, bracing with the oar in one hand and pushing the bear away with the other whenever it leaned too close, the spray of brine and blood mixing in a nauseating swirl. Finally, with a jolt and a roar of the engine, the motor sputtered, coughed, and came to life, propelling the small aluminum boat forward through the cold gray water. The bear lunged one last time, claws raking against the side, leaving deep gouges and dented metal, before splashing back into the shallows with a frustrated roar, water and spray marking its retreat. Jack leaned over Brian, gripping him tightly and keeping the boat steady as the distance widened, adrenaline and relief colliding violently within them. Their hearts pounded, legs trembled, and the cold spray of the sea misted over their sweat-soaked faces. But the immediate threat had passed. Behind them, the shore remained quiet, the forested cliffs concealing the predator once more, leaving only the floating remnants of their salmon catch and scattered gear as evidence of the chaos. By the time they reached the relative safety of deeper water, both men were trembling from exhaustion, fear, and blood loss. Brian's leg had been severely lacerated, the wound deep enough to require immediate medical attention. Jack applied pressure with whatever cloth he could find, his hands slick with blood, shaking from adrenaline and cold alike. They motored toward the nearest ranger station. The engines hum a fragile line of hope in the vast, empty expanse of Alaskan waters, aware that every second mattered if Brian was to survive the wound and stave off shock. Rangers met them on the dock, faces grim, helping Brian onto a gurney, noting the severity of the injury and rushing him to a medical facility for emergency surgery, while Jack recounted every harrowing detail with the clarity of a man who had stared into the raw force of nature and lived to tell the tale. In the aftermath, the event became a cautionary tale among fishermen on Kodiak Island. Even water, often considered a refuge from the massive bears of the island, offered no absolute protection when a predator was hungry and driven. Jack and Brian's survival depended on nothing more than quick thinking, experience, and a narrow margin of luck. In the following weeks, ranger patrols increased, warning other fishermen to secure their boats, remain vigilant, and understand that the raw power of a Kodiak bear could extend beyond the shore, a reminder that even familiar environments could become dangerous in the blink of an eye. On the morning of October 16, 2024, the small town of Belogorsk in Russia's Amur region lay blanketed in the crisp silver light of early autumn. The air carried the faint tang of pine and frost as locals moved about their daily routines, sipping tea and preparing for the brief hours of work before the harsh Siberian winter fully arrived. Outside the town, the surrounding forest had grown thin with the season, acorns and pine nuts in short supply after a poor harvest, leaving wildlife restless, searching, and hungry. Among those preparing for a quiet morning was Ivan Petrov, 42, a robust man with broad shoulders hardened by years of logging work. He had just settled at a small roadside cafe with his wife, Svetlana, 38, gentle and watchful, and their 10-year-old daughter, Alina, a curious girl with wide, observant eyes. They had chosen the modest cafe for its warmth, the smell of freshly baked bread mingling with the sharp aroma of strong tea, unaware that danger already lurked beyond the trees, drawn toward the scent of food and human activity. The forest edge shivered under an unseen weight as a massive grizzly moved through the undergrowth, muscles rippling beneath thick brown fur. Its nose twitched as it caught the scent of freshly cooked meals and the faint traces of breadcrumbs left by early patrons. Hunger and desperation drove the animal, its movements purposeful and terrifyingly silent for a creature of its size, until it reached the cafe parking area, where the first curious passerby glimpsed the dark shape through the thin morning mist. Without hesitation, the bear launched itself toward the structure, smashing through the rear kitchen door with a force that splintered wood and sent shards flying across the linoleum floor. The cafe's warmth and chatter vanished instantly, replaced by chaos, the high-pitched screech of bending metal, glass shattering, and panicked movement mingling with the shouting of staff and patrons. Ivan reacted first, instinctively rising to shield Svetlana and Alina, positioning his body between the bear and his family, with the raw determination of a man who understood the stakes. Plates and cups were knocked from tables, skittering across the floor as the bear's massive paws tore through wooden surfaces, sending hot soup and steaming tea spilling onto the ground and into fleeing feet. Chairs were flung aside like toys, and the bear's deep, resonant growl vibrated through the walls, echoing in the ears of everyone present. Svetlana clutched Alina, pulling her close, while Ivan lunged to push the bear back, his hands meeting fur and muscle, feeling the terrifying strength beneath claws that raked across his shoulders and arms. The attack was swift, brutal, and precise. Hunger-driven instincts guided every movement, each swipe and lunge a calculated effort to secure the source of food. Ivan fought with desperate courage, struggling to hold the creature at bay long enough for his family to escape, but the bear was relentless. One strike caught him across the chest, knocking him to the floor, pain exploding through his body as blood began to stain the checkered tiles. He tried to roll away, to rise again, but the massive animal pressed down with weight and intent, jaws snapping with terrifying precision. The screams of other diners mingled with the roar of the bear, creating a cacophony of fear and panic that filled the cafe, punctuated by overturned chairs and shattering crockery. Svetlana, realizing that any attempt to help Ivan directly would likely endanger her own life, tightened her grip on Alina, backing toward the shattered windows and doors, her legs trembling but moving with urgent determination. They stumbled into the street, the cold morning air a shocking contrast to the heat and chaos inside, and did not stop running until the distance between them and the cafe offered a tenuous sense of safety. Behind them, the bear continued its destructive rampage, teeth snapping at the floor and walls, growling with guttural intensity that seemed impossibly loud in the small space. Brave staff grabbed metal chairs and poured boiling water from kettles, managing to divert the bear's attention just long enough for it to retreat through the broken entrance, snarling and returning toward the fringes of town. Within minutes, police and local wildlife officers arrived, alerted by frantic calls from residents who had witnessed the attack. They followed the bear as it staggered through the outskirts, its bulk moving against the backdrop of frost-covered forest and low-lying fog. Shots were fired from a safe distance, aimed to subdue the predator before it could strike again. But the animal, weakened by hunger and already agitated, collapsed near a small grove, its final movements a mix of confusion and exhaustion. For Ivan Petrov, however, there was no rescue. His injuries were fatal, a stark, horrifying reminder of the cost of proximity to desperate wildlife. In the aftermath, the town of Belogorsk was plunged into grief. News of the attack spread rapidly, and the cafe remained cordoned off, tiles still stained with blood and food debris, chairs overturned in frozen testament to the sudden violence that had erupted in a place that had been routine and familiar only moments before. Svetlana and Alina were treated for shock, their faces pale, eyes wide with the lingering image of the bear's immense form and the loss of Ivan, whose courage had bought them precious seconds of survival. Officials warned that poor harvests of acorns and pine nuts, combined with shrinking forest habitats, were likely to push more wildlife into towns and villages, making encounters increasingly dangerous for ordinary citizens who went about daily routines, unaware of the invisible pressures mounting in the surrounding wilderness. The tragedy of Ivan Petrov's death became a somber lesson, a reminder that desperation drives even the strongest creatures to act with lethal determination, and that human life, though resilient, can be frighteningly fragile when confronted with the raw, untempered force of nature. Gideon Crowley had grown up on the rugged plains and foothills of Montana, a land of jagged rock outcroppings, wind-swept valleys, and dense pine pockets that hid both prey and predator in equal measure. He learned early that survival depended on knowledge, skill, and attention to the smallest detail. His grandfather, a former trapper with hands scarred from decades of handling steel and wood, had taught him to read tracks in frost and mud, predict animal behavior, and improvise under pressure when the unexpected appeared. By the time Gideon reached 35, he carried those lessons like armor, instincts honed by countless mornings and evenings in the wild, eyes trained to notice subtle movements in the forest, ears tuned to the snapping of twigs under weight far heavier than a deer. On the clear morning of September 3, 2023, he followed a narrow rocky creek deep in the Rockies, tracking a small herd of mule deer grazing along a steep ridge. Water tumbled over stones in glinting cascades, sunlight catching the mist rising from pools in the shaded bends. The forest was alive in a muted way, wind threading through needles and leaves, carrying scents both familiar and unknown. Gideon paused, kneeling briefly to inspect fresh tracks in damp soil. Noting the overlapping impressions of deer hooves and larger pads he immediately recognized as bear prints. He froze, scanning the slope across the creek, muscles in his shoulders tensing as he listened to the faintest rustle above the ridge. In an instant, the massive silhouette of a grizzly emerged, its brown fur blending almost perfectly with the surrounding boulders and trees, its head low but movements purposeful, nostrils flaring as it picked up the scent of the same deer Gideon had been tracking for the last hour. Every fiber in his body responded, heartbeat rising but controlled, the calm precision of preparation replacing panic. Years of reading signs, predicting reactions, and anticipating attacks formed a mental map. a set of options ready to deploy under pressure. The bear charged, its weight thundering against stone and root as it closed the distance with terrifying speed for an animal of such massive girth. Gideon remembered his grandfather's lessons. Never meet a charging bear head-on, move offline to force overshoot, stay balanced, and, if armed, shoot decisively at critical points. He dropped slightly to the side, executing what his grandfather had called the offline step, designed to make the bear overcommit its momentum and pass beyond its intended target. As he moved, he swung his custom rifle into position, the heavy barrel steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. His first shot rang out, a sharp crack echoing off rock faces, striking the bear in the shoulder. The massive animal stumbled, emitting a roar, part rage, part pain, but did not halt its advance. Gideon's breathing remained even, trained over decades of stalking, tracking, and shooting under pressure. The creature lunged again, teeth bared and claws extended, swiping at the ground and rocks near Gideon's feet. The air filled with the metallic tang of disturbed earth and the faint, sickly smell of blood. Without hesitation, Gideon fired a second round at point-blank range, striking the bear's chest and slowing its charge almost entirely. The animal recoiled, shaking its massive head, muscles quivering, and the offline step combined with precise fire finally forced it to hesitate, circling warily as if reconsidering its options. Even then, the danger was far from over. The bear, though injured, was enormous, its raw strength and persistence a constant threat as it pawed at loose rocks and snapped small trees. Gideon's mind raced, calculating the distance to safer terrain, familiar paths that could provide cover, and potential escape routes where he could keep the animal at bay until it decided the effort outweighed the reward. Blood ran from small cuts on his forearms, scraped by branches and sharp stone, but he ignored the sting, moving deliberately along a narrow trail that wound through boulder-strewn slopes, past dense brush, and along natural rock overhangs that could obscure him from the bear's view. As he exfiltrated, Gideon maintained constant awareness of the bear's reactions, watching for signs of renewed aggression. Each step was measured, maintaining balance on uneven ground while keeping the rifle ready. He ducked behind a fallen pine, allowing the bear to pass near the creek's bend without noticing his position. Muscles tensed, heartbeat steady, mind focused entirely on the dance of predator and prey that had shifted between them. The grizzly snarled, shaking its head and pawing at the ground where it had struck. But it did not pursue with the same reckless momentum, clearly affected by the precise shots that had slowed it, and the clever positioning that had frustrated its attacks. Finally, Gideon reached a wider section of trail leading to a familiar logging path, terrain he had memorized over countless hikes and treks. The grizzly's growls faded behind him as he moved steadily, bloodied and sore but unbroken, until he reached the safety of lower, more open ground, where he could signal for help or return to his base camp. He paused briefly, checking his rifle and scanning the surrounding slopes for any sign the bear had recovered sufficiently to re-engage, then continued along the trail with cautious but confident steps. Each movement reflected decades of experience, every decision shaped by prior lessons in wilderness survival, tracking, and anticipating the behavior of large predators. As Gideon emerged from the Rocky Creek region, he exhaled, muscles finally relaxing after the sustained tension, allowing himself a brief moment to appreciate that skill, preparation, and calm under extreme pressure had saved his life that day. The encounter with the grizzly would remain etched in his mind, the roar of the bear, the weight of its charge, and the immediacy of life-or-death decisions, but it also served as proof that knowledge, respect for the wild, and readiness could tilt the odds, even against the raw, unpredictable force of nature. On May 8, 2024, the sun shone brightly over a busy Pennsylvania state park, the kind of clear, warm day that drew families out of their homes in droves. Picnic tables were crowded with children, parents, and grandparents, everyone enjoying the spring air and the smell of food sizzling on portable grills. The park was alive with laughter, the squeals of toddlers chasing each other, and the occasional bark of a dog running free across the grassy fields. Near the edge of the picnic area, dense forest rose abruptly, the dark green of trees forming a calm, still wall. Though hidden within it, a massive black bear watched and sniffed the air, drawn by the irresistible scent of food and human commotion. At first, people noticed the bear, but treated it as a curious, almost amusing sight. It ambled slowly out of the trees, sniffing the air with head low and eyes bright, making straight for a row of trash cans overflowing with food wrappers, half-eaten sandwiches, and soda cans. Children squealed with excitement, parents pointed, and a few people even reached for their phones to record the unusual visitor, laughing nervously at its proximity. The bear pawed at the cans, toppling one and spilling food across the ground. Its large, black form moved with a surprising combination of weight and grace, each step sending a ripple of unease through those who paused to notice its size. The situation turned dangerous in an instant. A woman in her 30s, seeing the bear near her picnic area, stepped forward, waving her arms in an attempt to scare it away. In that moment, something inside the bear snapped. It lunged forward with shocking speed, shifting from curious forager to aggressive threat in a heartbeat. Screams erupted across the area as people scattered, leaving coolers, baskets, and half-eaten plates behind. Sandwiches, chips, and soda cans tumbled across the grass as children were scooped up by frantic parents, some tripping in their rush to escape. The bear's first swipe sent a cooler sliding across the picnic area, spilling ice and drinks in all directions. Then it turned toward the woman, who stumbled and fell onto the grass. Another person nearby grabbed her arm, pulling her to safety just as the bear's paw swiped mere inches from her. Heartbeats later, the bear charged a father crouched to shield his young child. Its claws raked across his back, tearing through his shirt and leaving deep, bleeding scratches. He fell forward, protecting his child as best he could while the child clung tightly, wide-eyed and terrified. Panic spread quickly through the crowd. People ran in every direction, slipping on spilled food and grass, knocking over chairs and bags. Dogs barked frantically, some breaking loose from leashes, while adults shouted instructions, trying to gather children and keep them moving away from the bear. The air was filled with a mix of raw fear, shouted warnings, and the low, guttural growl of the bear, punctuated by the sharp clatter of overturned tables and crushed picnic supplies. For several moments, the chaos seemed endless, each second stretching as the bear swiped at objects, lunged toward people, and moved unpredictably across the crowded area. Finally, park rangers arrived, their trucks roaring as they pulled up amid the chaos. They jumped out, blowing air horns and firing rubber bullets toward the bear, creating enough noise to startle and confuse it. The bear hesitated, shook its head, and retreated a few steps toward the edge of the woods, growling as it assessed the threat. Rangers continued to fire in controlled bursts, forcing it further back until it finally vanished into the safety of the trees, leaving the picnic area littered with debris, spilled food, and terrified families trying to catch their breath. The father who had been clawed was treated on site for deep scratches and bruising, his shirt ruined and skin still stinging. The woman who had fallen avoided serious injury, thanks to the quick reaction of the person who pulled her away. Other minor injuries, scrapes, sprains, and cuts, were treated by rangers and emergency responders. Though no one was killed, the emotional toll was heavy. Parents held children tightly, eyes scanning the forest line nervously, while the laughter that had filled the park was replaced by whispers, shouts, and quiet sobbing. Officials later determined the bear had been food conditioned, a product of repeated exposure to human trash and improperly stored picnic supplies. Signs warning visitors not to feed wildlife, along with bear-proof trash bins, had often been ignored, leaving the animal familiar with human food and unafraid to approach. The incident served as a grim reminder that even normally peaceful wildlife could become dangerous when humans inadvertently trained them to expect food, and that moments of carelessness could escalate into near disaster in seconds. The bear was later captured by wildlife officers after being tracked through the surrounding forest. Because of its dangerous behavior and history of human interaction, it was euthanized. Park officials stressed that the tragedy could have been far worse, and emphasized that education, vigilance, and respect for wildlife were the only ways to prevent future incidents. Families present at the picnic area carried the memory of the attack for months, their sense of security shaken as they realized how quickly even a familiar, seemingly safe environment could erupt into chaos when the line between humans and hungry wildlife blurred. By the end of the day, the picnic area was cordoned off for cleanup. Workers collected debris, repaired damaged trash cans, and replaced overturned tables. Though the grass was littered with food scraps and scattered plates, the larger lesson lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed the attack. Wildlife, especially animals accustomed to human food, is unpredictable, powerful, and potentially dangerous, and a single careless moment can turn a sunny afternoon into a terrifying, life-threatening situation. On the morning of January 16, 2024, the small Alaskan village of Kotlik lay under a blanket of pale winter light, snow crunching beneath boots and sleds as children made their way home from school, laughing and joking despite the bitter cold that bit at cheeks and fingers. The village, tucked between frozen tidal flats and the edge of a thinning sea ice shelf, had grown used to the harsh rhythm of winter, knowing that each season brought both beauty and danger. On this day, danger arrived in a form no one had expected. From the far edge of the frozen flats, a massive polar bear appeared, its broad, gaunt frame moving with steady, relentless determination. The animal's fur, thick but matted, bore signs of hunger and stress, the lean shape of its body hinting at weeks without sufficient food, as the sea ice melted earlier than usual, leaving fewer seals to hunt. The first to notice it were the children, their laughter faltering as they saw the enormous shape lumbering across the snow. At first, they giggled nervously, pointing at the bear as if it were too far away to pose a real threat, but the moment changed instantly. With a sudden burst of speed, the bear charged, its massive paws pounding the frozen ground, snow spraying in wide arcs. A chained sled dog, left tied near the side of a house, barked and strained at its leash. The bear lunged, jaws snapping, and in seconds the dog was killed, flung aside as the animal tore at the chain and surrounding ground. The sound of teeth tearing, combined with the high-pitched cries of children, turned the morning into chaos. Parents ran into the street shouting for children to take cover. Those who could grabbed the nearest sleds, sticks, or tools, attempting to form barriers between their families and the predator. Some fired warning shots into the air, hoping the noise would scare the bear, but it ignored them, its gaunt eyes fixed on the nearest source of movement, scanning for food in its desperation. The bear moved with terrifying speed despite its size, snow kicking up around its paws as it pressed toward the center of the village, the school building just a few dozen meters away. Families barricaded themselves inside homes and community buildings, doors bolted and windows closed, hearts pounding as they watched the enormous creature advance, growls low and deep, vibrating through the snow and air. Among the villagers, one man acted quickly and decisively. Ethan Carlson, a 40-year-old hunter who had grown up in the area and knew both the land and its wildlife intimately, grabbed his rifle and ran along a familiar path toward the schoolyard, keeping the bear in view. He moved carefully, aware that any mistake could trigger an attack, but determined to protect the children and stop the animal before more lives were at risk. The polar bear, weakened but driven by hunger, had begun to slow slightly as its energy waned, yet its intent was clear. It would take what it could from the village if left unchecked. As Ethan approached, he positioned himself on a slight rise of snow, ensuring a clear shot while keeping as much distance as possible. The bear, sensing movement, turned slightly, sniffing the air, then continued forward. Ethan's hands remained steady despite adrenaline coursing through his veins. He aimed carefully, squeezing the trigger in a controlled burst that struck the bear at close range. The massive animal staggered, letting out a powerful roar that echoed across the village, shaking snow from nearby rooftops. A second shot followed, and the bear finally collapsed in the snow, still and defeated, its life ended by the precise action of someone who understood both the danger and the responsibility of confronting it. In the aftermath, the village slowly emerged from homes, children huddled close to parents, wide-eyed but unharmed. The sled dog lay lifeless nearby, a silent testament to the bear's desperation and the sudden, raw force that had entered their lives. For many, the shock was almost overwhelming. A predator normally bound to distant ice had wandered into the streets, turning a routine morning into a near tragedy. Families hugged tightly, some shaking, some crying, while others moved carefully through the snow, assessing damage, checking fences, and ensuring all children were accounted for. Wildlife officials later explained the polar bear's behavior was a direct result of environmental changes. Early melting of sea ice had left fewer seals to hunt, forcing the bear inland in search of food. Its lean frame and gaunt appearance were evidence of prolonged hunger. While such incidents remained rare, experts warned that as climate change continued to shrink the bear's natural hunting grounds, more encounters like this could occur. The incident became a stark reminder that even remote communities are not immune to the consequences of global warming and the ripple effects on wildlife. For the people of Kotlik, the day left more than physical scars or a dead dog. It brought a chilling sense of vulnerability, a recognition that the natural world is changing, and that survival for humans and animals alike may increasingly intersect in dangerous ways. Hunters and rangers worked together to patrol the edges of the village in the following days, ensuring no other starving wildlife entered, while children were taught to recognize danger and respond quickly if another predator appeared. Though the polar bear was gone, the story lingered like a shadow over Kotlik. The snow-covered streets, once playful and quiet, now carried the memory of teeth, claws, and the sudden frightening power of hunger-driven survival.